Hey, this is Brooks with Character Design Forge. One real quick thing at the beginning. I wanted to let you know that my next video after this one will be the first round of critiques for people like you who have been supporting me over on Patreon at the new Novice Bard tier. I've redone all of my Patreon levels and stuff, so you can look forward to that new video. And if you'd like a critique of your own, a personalized video around 5 minutes in length that's going into some advice and helpful things for your artwork, head over to patreon.com/bageldenizen and sign up for one yourself. Plenty of videos online are simple enough in practice that watching a 5 or 10 minute video is all it really takes for you to learn the steps to be able to do that same thing yourself. But it's different if, say, you're looking to create, say, an artisan chair. You could follow the same steps as an expert craftsman and probably end up with 4 legs, a seat, and a back. But the real solution to how to create an artisan chair is be an experienced carpenter. That's part of why, as a personal value, I try not to make videos that pretend like storytelling or art and character design are something quick and easy that require minimal effort. Some aspects are simple enough, but ultimately that kind of video tends to be disingenuous. Still though, I want to equip you with what it takes to create characters people care about. And even though this isn't an overnight process, I know that these things will benefit you. And if you're someone who's curious about doing this, or especially if you're someone who's serious about it, these things will definitely be worth your while. The collection of things in this video are tips and advice for helping you to create characters for an audience. And just like being a master woodworker helps create an artisan chair, a lot of these things are here to help you become the person who can create characters that people care about. Quick quiz, what is the correct order one creates characters and stories in? Is it characters first and then stories, or stories and then characters? If you answered mash these balls of clay into each other, then you'd be right. The storytelling process is not so clear-cut that you fully develop a character and then a story to go with it, or vice versa. There is a ton of give and take between these two. It's a relationship. Characters serve stories, and stories serve characters. A lot of times you'll see storytellers, especially writers, talk about how their characters did something that they didn't expect them to do. As in, the fictional character who was created by this person started to act almost independent of them in this creator's mind. This can happen when characters are well developed with really strong personalities. It's important to keep in mind though which one you'll ultimately favor between stories and characters though. If you have a well-honed ending to your story that you'd like to reach, but it doesn't seem right that these characters would end up that place themselves, it doesn't feel true that they would, then you need to modify those characters, their personalities and motives to fit that conclusion. And of course, on the other hand, if you want to let your characters run wild, then you have to serve the character or allow the character to be served by the story. Characters serving stories, stories serving characters. It's give and take. World building can be a ton of fun, and to a certain extent, it's important to have. A character, like I've said before, needs context. Beyond just being an image on a screen with a blank background, a character should have a personality, other things to interact with, and an environment to exist in. World building can get to be too much fun though. Once you've developed a complex plot, a world or city for your characters to live in, the intricate backstory of every character even remotely related to yours, the weather and currency, you've filled out the world, but the story is seriously lacking. Some writers have given this advice that you should have a playlist of your character's favorite music, you should know what their favorite color is, you should know what they had for breakfast this morning, and past a certain amount of useful information for the character, you've fallen into a similar world-building trap. Here's one of a few times that'll bring up Star Wars. Star Wars has one of the most deeply embellished, lived-in universes there is. In fact, there's a team of 8 people at Lucasfilm called the Story Group, whose exclusive job it is to maintain consistency across the franchise's canon. And a lot of the minutia is gone into as well. If you see an alien walk by in the background, chances are if you just wait a few years, you'll have a tie-in story for that character, if not a full-on novelization. There are companies in universe who are manufacturing all of the droids and ships. There's unique ecologies to each of the planets. Just so much information, and it's a lot of fun for fans like me and my Character Select co-host Mark to just look through all of this stuff. Like, say you want to know how many rebel outposts there were during the Second Galactic Civil War.
Brookes, that's not right at all. Look, the Clone War wasn't one of the Galactic Civil Wars. The first Galactic Civil War was between the Empire and the Rebels. Now, if you go to 43 ABY, well, then you got it. Yeah, 40 years later.
However, if you zoom out of Star Wars, you see that this lived-in universe is a big feature of the brand, but by no means is it the focus of the main story. In the movies, the story is told in very broad strokes, and apart from some technobabble and some great science fantasy moments, these stories are about real people who are actually accomplishing a very finite amount each movie. So what can you do to avoid the trap of world building so much that it's too late to tell your actual story? Or worse, that you've put the cart before the horse, and because of the amount of world building you've done, the stories that you can tell are now stifled. Well, you have to focus on the uppercase W what your story is about, and not the lowercase w what. What does that mean? This lowercase w what includes all the things that pertain to the world building in your story, including things like the plot and the external events that happen. Now, I'm getting a lot of this from a book called Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald, which I'd highly recommend if you're looking to be more serious about being a storyteller. One of the things that he mentions is how the movie Jaws, the lowercase w what that happens is it's three guys going to hunt a shark. And for some people, that may be all they absorb from the movie. But what makes Jaws great is the uppercase what. It's about a character who learns to overcome his fear of the water. The uppercase W what includes things like character arcs and themes, the things that make us understand and care about characters. So if you've been wondering how that all relates back to creating characters that people care about, well, there you go. A plot, the action set pieces, the external events that happen in a story aren't enough to make us care about a character. But seeing them go through something and how they react and grow, that does. Now, all of that brings us to the idea of themes, which is something I've talked about before. A theme isn't so much a word, like revenge, but a statement or sentence. Something like revenge is short-sighted and will come back to bite you. It's kind of like the moral of a story, but it isn't necessarily stated so blatantly. Put simply, it's the idea that the storyteller wants to get across to you. It's the thing that they're trying to say. Characters will come down on both sides of this idea, they'll maybe have some conflicts over this ideal, and ultimately the storyteller chooses which side wins. So, what are you trying to say? You can try and retroactively tie a theme in with an existing story, and this is totally one of those same relationship things with the clay balls. It's something that can give and take and you can develop over time. However, the strongest stories are the ones that use a theme as a branching off point, as a spine for the rest of the story. And every idea either supports that theme or relates to it, or otherwise is cut or trimmed off. Now, it can work to pick a theme out of midair, the way that I did with revenge just now, but revenge isn't something that I, as a person, have dealt with too much or have much experience with. So it would be better for me to pull from something that I have experience with. The best way to make a compelling and emotional core to your story is to come from a place that's authentic, that's you, that's something that you have experience with, something that you want to say.
Yeah, rock that scuba! Wow!
Characters, like frisbees, are no good sitting still. They need to move forward. And like a well-thrown frisbee, a character will have an arc. They'll start in one place and change over time. The way that people will most potently care about your character is if they get to experience and see this character going through this arc firsthand. So you could make people feel sorry for your character and give them a tragic backstory, or awe them with triumphant tales, but the best way for them to care about the character is to see them doing this, going through this arc, starting in one place and growing, either learning something or going through a change as a person, either positively or negatively. In my video about creating character arcs, I gave you what is still my favorite advice for them, which is to teach yourself a lesson. So thinking about your younger self and a time when you didn't know something and the change that you went through to get where you are now. What would you do if you went back in time and taught that younger person or shared that experience with your younger self? Now, for characters going through a character arc, they don't have to follow those literal same events, but think about those beats. What did you go through to learn or change? I'll link that video at the end of this one as well, so you can learn more about that idea. But character arcs are something that are really important for your character to go through, an internal struggle versus just an external one. And I'm telling you, a lot of this stuff has to do with who you are as a person. And I think it's why life experience contributes so well to better artists and better storytellers. The larger well you have to draw from, and the more sort of self-actualized and honest you are as a person, the more heartfelt and real these stories and characters you make will be. So don't let your characters sit still. Don't regale us with things that happened, show us. Rock that, Scuba.
Someone please tell me we Kodak that moment.
Speaking of show, don't tell. Please don't write out a 6-paragraph biography about your character, who their parents were, what powers they used to have, all those things, and then expect people to read it. The best thing that I can equate this to is describing your dream to someone. So I could start telling you guys about how I had this dream once where I think I was in like a classroom, but it didn't feel like a classroom. And the floor, it was made of like chewing gum. And at this point, the majority of you have tuned me out. Describing a dream isn't fun for other people. But if you were to take that dream and make it into a movie or a comic, now other people have something tangible so that they could experience this dream for themselves and maybe gain an appreciation for it, instead of you just describing or recounting it to them. So hopefully that makes some sense. Show your characters, don't tell them. Ready for another Star Wars thing? Alfred Hitchcock, the creator of Star Wars, Alfred Hitchcock once said that logic is dull, that plausibility for plausibility's sake doesn't help anything. And he called people that bank so heavily on plausibility in stories our old friends, the plausibles. Don't be a plausible. Now, this is certainly not an excuse for lazy storytelling, but I think it's important for us to recognize that when people are taking cheap shots at entertainment and even gaining a lot of popularity for doing so, it's our job as creative people to rise above that. Every work of fiction can be broken down to a point where it's no longer plausible or something doesn't make sense. But instead of fretting over every piece of implausibility or going down a rabbit hole of why didn't they justs, which I know you've heard of these before. It's like, why didn't they just do this at the beginning of the movie? Well, then we wouldn't have a movie. Are you happy? Does that satisfy you? Instead, focus on moving an audience, making them feel or care about something. I think people get superiority complexes where they get to a point where they feel superior because they've observed or can point out a flaw or a plot hole or mistake that they see. And honestly, this kind of thing is just exhausting. So please, rise above this attitude and instead focus on what makes characters and stories so powerful in the first place. And your characters, if you build them right and craft them the right way, they're actually going to be prone to making mistakes. They'll have flaws, they'll have miscommunications between themselves, and they'll have conflicts over said flaws. And the story won't play out as this perfect and ideal path of choices and actions. That's just kind of a boring story overall. Chuck Jones once said about the absurdity of his animated work, it doesn't have to be realistic. It just has to be believable. Now, I have to assume that you watching this are a creative person, right? One with their own imagination. Well, if that's the case, then leave the unimaginative criticism to the people who won't make things themselves and just do better. Now, for some people, I think that showing that they dislike something gives them a power over it, and in turn, they feel like it gives them power. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have fun at a bad piece of fiction's expense. And I'm not saying that constructive criticism isn't helpful. I think it's something that's vital if you're learning to get that from a qualified source. What I am saying, though, is if you're a creative person who's serious about it, don't make this critical and cynical attitude a part of your identity. Now, here's the Star Wars thing I was talking about. Now, in Star Wars, there is a light side and a dark side to the Force. Now, the Force, to put it simply, is the energy that surrounds and binds all living things. Now, the light side of the Force is best manifested by selflessness and selfless actions, while the dark side is best represented by selfishness. Using the dark side is like a cancer. It takes something from you. And that's been made thematically clear through the countless missing limbs, scars, and wrinkles that the dark side has given its users in Star Wars. Speaking of that Lucasfilm story group that I told you about, Pablo Hidalgo, one of its members, has talked about how Grey Jedi, someone who can simultaneously use the light and dark side of the Force as an idea, is impossible. Now, the best way that I can relate this metaphor within a metaphor is on the pH scale. You have a lemon on one side, which is acidic, you have bleach on the other side, which is basic, and then you have water, which is right in the middle. Now, if you combined these two things, you wouldn't get something that's both acidic and basic at the same time. You'd meet it in the middle, something like water that isn't potent in either direction. So, where am I going with all of this? Well, creativity, if I may be so biased, is the light side of the Force. It's the boundless, life-giving energy that makes people feel happy, that makes people care about things through story, at least in this example. Cynical criticism is the dark side. Now, it may serve to be useful as a stopgap for low-quality or insincere corporate storytelling, but ultimately these things lead to picking things apart, ruining the illusion, and making it so these things aren't fun anymore. Check this pattern out too. A lot of times it's angry people who are taking their anger out on this thing, and it's completely unrelated to the quality of the work, but a dissatisfaction the person has in themselves. This unimaginative dark side of cynicism is so easy to fall into, and that's why there's a huge popular culture that's come up around it. It gets tons of views on YouTube. It ruins people's opinions of things to the point where they're just repeating back and echoing the same mimetic sentiments. It's so easy, and that's why I'm telling you, you should avoid it. Because you can't be a Grey Jedi. You'll be balanced in the middle of the scale like water, completely ineffective. It's easy to tear someone or something else down. So instead, have the courage to build yourself up and make the best things that you can make.
And now for something completely different.
So especially if you're designing and drawing characters, it's important to make people care about them visually. Now, you can make people take your characters at face value, or you can subvert those expectations and make the character not what they seem or not what they appear to be. Now, either way though, you are communicating something to your audience. Design and visual language is all communication. One big quality that makes people care about a character visually is their appeal. So if you give a character baby-like features to make them adorable, that's appeal. If you make them attractive or ruggedly handsome or dashingly debonair or just plain cute, that's all appeal. There's something that you've invoked from the audience to feel about the character. But if you make a character so scary or grotesque that the audience goes, whoa, or ew, that's also appeal. It's all about invoking a reaction from your audience, and if it's the one that you intended, then you've got appeal down right. Here are a few visual cliches to avoid when creating your character. The first is an overly dark or brooding character. Now, this is the kind of character that wears all black, is really sullen and downcast all the time. Usually this character is common because children becoming teenagers have suddenly learned about and experienced a lot of new negative emotions, and creating this kind of character is a means of expressing themselves this way. Now, you can still use these traits or this trait to make a character, but just keep in mind that in order to subvert or do this well, you're still going to have a very high barrier of entry for people to care about it. The next cliche is really all in the execution. It's usually executed fairly poorly, and that's rainbow color schemes, usually trying to fit too many colors into a hairstyle, say, or just generally clashing and garish colors and using too many of them. There's two reasons that this is common. One being that people new to digital art, but maybe without a foundation of or understanding of colors, suddenly have every crayon in the digital art toolbox of colors available to them, and they just go wild. Another thing, kind of reading into it a little bit in that same teenage age range, is sort of the search for individuality, and a rainbow colored character seems to be special or unique or perhaps elevated over others. And that's sort of a theme of young adult fiction and stuff, is that being special aspect. If you want to see how to make a rainbow color scheme well, or just have a better understanding of colors without them being garish, I will link you to another one of my videos, which is about color, at the end of this video. A third thing is casts of characters who include but are not limited to anime aesthetic characters, and this is where the entire cast is basically roughly the same size and shape. All the characters look pretty much the same except for a change in hairstyle, hair color, eye color, kind of superficial things like that. The reason being, if the lineup of your characters looks like a set of bowling pins, it's hard for us to sort of latch onto them individually, and therefore, again, it's the barrier of entry is harder to reach. So look for some variance in shapes and just variety overall in your casts. So completely original things don't exist. And worse, if you're striving so much to create something that's never been made before, you may end up making something that's completely unappealing and obtuse. So instead of trying to aim for something original, be okay with the fact that most ideas are somewhat rehashed or refiltered through people. You're taking all the experiences and things that you've taken in and filtering them through yourself. It also might be helpful for you to kind of take pieces and bits of characters who have done well, that appeal to people, that people care about, and maybe use bits of that to influence your characters. Just don't plagiarize. One last thing. Not everyone will care. And that should come as a relief. Instead of trying to make something that appeals to absolutely everyone, which usually results in making something that no one cares about, really aim for just one audience. If you look at even the biggest brands and themes and stories, the ones that are the most well-loved, there's a large amount of people who are completely ambivalent to it, that don't care. And then a small amount of people who actually actively hate or dislike the thing. And then you have the people who like it. So this should be an empowering thing. Really aim for one audience. Maybe even choose a person that is close to you or who you like the taste of, and use that person as a model for your audience, and just make the thing for that person. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the next video that you see me uploading will be those individualized critiques that I made for people over on my Patreon at the new Novice Bard tier or higher. If you'd like a video like that of your own, where I'm taking a personal look at your artwork, giving you some critique and helpful advice, it's not something that has to be posted publicly afterward. That's completely optional. You can go over to patreon.com/bageldenizen and check out the Novice Bard tier, and there's a ton of other things that I've added there too, even if that's not something that's of interest to you guys. I've talked about this a lot recently, but as a person, I'm at a point where I am just butter over too much bread. And the majority of my time I'm spending just trying to make a living for us and help us get by. And I know a lot of people are in that position. But it comes to a point where the amount of time that I'm able to make things like this for you guys is kind of crammed into the limited free time available. And between the lack of time for that and lack of time even for just some rest, I'm exhausted as a person. And so I've talked about this before, even as unrealistic as it is, just take it as an example. If every person subscribed to this YouTube channel was giving $1 or less than $1 a year, which is like 6 to 10 cents a month, on average, of course not everyone's able to do that, we would be completely supported financially. We could save a little bit. We could even have insurance. I could be making things like video games and videos and comics for you guys full time. So if that's something that you're interested in, head over to patreon.com/bageldenizen and you can get stuff in return from me, because that's what I want to do. I want to keep giving stuff to you guys. Thank you so much for watching and have fun creating.